Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a big update regarding the potential minerals deal between the United States and Ukraine with the key raw details. And what is the sticking point? Now Zelensky saying, no, just like I said 2 months ago, it's a grant and we don't owe the United States anything. Ukraine says, well, you know what? They've calculated around 123 billion. When you look at all of the top numbers, Trump says like 360 billion. I've heard the accurate numbers about 170, 180 billion in total aid and equipment to Ukraine that they need to repay us. And the form would be these minerals and the extraction zones within Ukraine. And we've got details on this, but Zelensky giving an ultimatum on Trump saying, we want to join the EU. We're obsessed with it. Remember, they applied to join in 2022 after the invasion, and they were granted a candidate status in 2023 by the European Union. And they're saying, well, this affects, if we sign on to this current minerals deal, this affects our economic sovereignty, and we don't want to do it. And you've also got Zelensky coming out and saying that, well, Putin's going to die real soon. We're done with it. You've got Putin saying that we might just wipe all of Ukraine off because they're both jousting, I think, right now for negotiations. That's the hope. There's a lot of people fear-mongering saying, well, NATO, the European countries are going to send troops. They're for real, the UK. I think we've come way too far to escalate this thing further. Trump's gotten in. This is what you see. See, the thing is, there wasn't a lot going on in terms of this war, at least on the front line, when it came to movement the past year and a half, the past 4 or 5 months, really right after Trump won with Biden authorizing the longer range missiles. That was seen as an escalation for Putin, but that's all done because they know the negotiation is coming. They both want to be in an amazing position during the peace negotiations. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, Russia has total control. There's no reason for them to agree to a peace deal. It doesn't make sense. You can almost call NATO's bluff, because if we're just talking about Ukraine versus Russia, Russia would win. Now, there's a lot that goes into that. Obviously, the West sanctioning Russia, hurting their economy, and Russia also spending significant resources just to defeat Ukraine alone. Does it make sense for Russia to spend more on this war rather than come to a potential deal? And because we know the bluff is that NATO would send in troops, they're not going to do that. NATO will support from afar. They will send Ukraine money. I mean, they've given them more technology, better technology than the Russians have because of how advanced we are compared to Russia. But the issue is Russia knows that there's going to be no NATO troop involvement. I know there's been reports about the UK sending troops. I think they're going to be patrolling a DMZ. It's all going to get worked out. It's too late in the ball game. If they were going to really escalate and they were seriously concerned of a situation to where most of parts of Europe could be seriously impacted outside of eastern Ukraine, there would have been immediate troop involvement, and because Biden was significantly more pro-Ukraine than Trump is. So now you're going to have troop involvement if you're the European countries when Trump doesn't support it. The most powerful country in your military alliance does not support involvement and wants peace between these two countries and has been promoting it and saying and running on the idea that he was going to end the war, and the United States elected him in part to end this war, and the European countries want to commit to it. They're by themselves. It doesn't make any sense. They would have done this earlier. So this is all negotiations and jousting. Understand that when Trump won, everything gets crazy again because they want to be in perfect position to negotiate a peace deal and to get as much as they possibly can for it. That's why the European countries are helping Ukraine right now by saying they'll send troops, they'll send this, that, and the other, because in a peace negotiation, if Ukraine is working with nobody behind them, they're going to get destroyed because they have no leverage. But if they have all of NATO, that's why Zelensky, they originally agreed to the ceasefire, and now there's been talks about, well, it was Putin who doesn't want to agree to ceasefire. He wants to delay the ceasefire and extend the war. There was a partial ceasefire. The original ceasefire that was agreed upon by Ukraine enabled them to get updates and clearances from the United States. Again, it basically made us a partner with Ukraine again, but we're also kind of a partner with Russia now because we're mediating. But the original ceasefire, it enabled funding to Ukraine, or I'm not sure if it enabled funding, but it enabled the United States to work with Ukraine, and that was part of the whole idea of reaching peace. And Putin said, well, I'll do the ceasefire, but I want to talk to Trump first. So then he calls Trump for about an hour and a half. Liberals like made up said that Putin put Trump on hold for an hour. That's not how these things work. But and then they agree to like a partial ceasefire on infrastructure. They don't even have a full ceasefire in place yet. So it is a mess, but let's get to this. And this is really important details. You've got Zelensky. I'm going to zoom this. Well, what is this? I'm going to zoom this in. We'll go through this, finally getting details on this. Zelensky would only agree to a minerals deal that could give his country security guarantees against Russian aggression, but these have not been forthcoming, and an agreement could compromise EU membership, adds a further snag. Well, they report in this the original minerals deal did not involve security assurances from the United States, but it's going to tie the United States to Ukraine. But that's a major coup for Donald Trump if he's able to do that, to be able to extract these minerals, get back around whatever it is, 160, 170 billion dollars in minerals that the United States spent on this war, and not have to tether yourself to a military defense of Ukraine, which obviously Zelensky wants. I mean, Zelensky could get that, hopefully that defense and the security from the European countries. Trump wants to leave this area. It's very obvious. That's why he's talked about leaving NATO. That's why Elon Musk has also said, and basically like, yeah, we need to leave NATO. It's a prehistoric agreement. It was put in place to stop the USSR. That's why they're trying to do this whole thing with Putin. He's going to put back together the Soviet Union, because that's why NATO was there in the first place. Now Americans realize, well, wait, the USSR fell in 1991. They don't have nearly as much power. They've barely even been able to capture 1/5 of Ukraine. So how are they going to recapture all of those Eastern European countries to reform the USSR? But no, it's all fear-mongering, because now Americans are like, wait, if NATO was put in place as a defense pact against Soviet aggression, there's no Soviet Union. Why is NATO needed? And see, there it is. And that's why Trump's going to leave, and he can unilaterally leave without Congress, and liberals are going to throw a fit, but it's legal. I've looked it up. So Trump can leave NATO if he wants to, but it's like people are going to be mad about it. They'll say, oh, it's an overreach on executive power, but he can unilaterally do that. So it says that this potential deal that the United States wants Ukraine to sign, which they just apparently received a draft of it. This is a new deal, maybe a revised deal. They said it goes against their economic sovereignty and potentially joining the EU, which obviously they want to do. This would apply to all mineral resources, including, well, what does it say here? Financial Times reported that the latest version of the agreement proposed by the U.S. would see Washington control Ukraine's natural resources through a joint investment fund. It's all mineral resources, including oil and gas and major energy assets, which Ukrainian officials fear would undermine their nation's sovereignty. So they don't want the United States to have all this control over their minerals and their gas and oil. Trump has floated exploiting Ukrainian rare earths as redress for U.S. military aid of Kyiv, and an agreement was reportedly due to be signed on February 28th, but put on ice after the White House spat between him and Zelensky that we remember. I mean, they were going to sign that. So I don't know, is this a revised bill or what's going on with this? You could see Zelensky said on March 25th, which was around 4 days ago, the United States had proposed a minerals deal without giving a timeline, a day after Trump said the deal would be signed soon. I do remember that happening. Trump said that on, I think he was traveling somewhere, and he said that on Air Force One. They asked him, and he said it's going to happen soon. The initial version of the agreement would establish a fund to which Ukraine would contribute 50% of proceeds from the extraction of state-owned resources, including oil, gas, and logistics infrastructure. The version Kiev approved earlier does not include security guarantees, but says that the fund would reinvest for the benefit of Ukraine. So even the one that they agreed to and they were going to sign was not security guarantees. That's nice for Trump to not have to worry about that. I mean, the question is, in terms of the context, if you are extracting minerals, isn't it kind of built in, even if there are no security guarantees? I mean, this is kind of where it gets weird, because Trump has a decent relationship with Russia. Does it really matter? Like, I don't think anything's going to happen with a reinvasion Russia onto Ukraine if, let's just say, the peace deal happens in the summer. Within Trump's 4 years, or at that point, it'll be 3.5 years, will anything happen? Will Putin decide to reinvade with Trump as president? It seems extremely unlikely. But even if that happened because of our relationship with Russia, would that really affect our mineral extraction? I think Russia would probably come to us and say, listen, this is what we're going to do. We're going to invade. And although I'm sure it probably would to a degree affect it in some form, it's hard to exactly predict the way in which it would affect depending on where the mineral extraction would be. I don't think there's going to be a reinvasion within 3 years if this peace deal gets worked out, though. I think that's the key point. But the question is, if we do the minerals deal, even if there are no security guarantees, there is the idea of, well, we have to protect our minerals, or do we really not care enough? Because at the end of the day, does it really matter if there's a war going on, if whether or not we get our 30 or 40 billion dollars in minerals? I mean, this would be a huge thing for Trump if he's able to get this and pitch it. An extra 130, 140 billion dollars, whatever it is. See, they say that it's 123 billion in terms of total. I've heard a lot of euros. They say, well, it's only 70 or 80 billion the United States is given. I thought it was 170. That was the correct number, the accurate number. Now they're saying it's 123 billion. So I always thought it was 170. Trump said it was 360, but it's a lot of money, obviously. I mean, this is what happens when we're in NATO and we have the biggest military budget. We've got by far the #1 GDP in the alliance, and so it is what it is. Nothing that could threaten Ukraine's accession to the EU can be accepted. And so that's what he's saying. So they're making a huge deal about joining the EU and saying, well, if they've got control of all of our minerals and our gas and oil, that's going to affect our application and our candidate status as a potential EU member. They know they're not joining NATO. That's going to be agreed upon. I wonder what Putin thinks about them potentially joining the EU, and if that is something that's potentially negotiated as well during a peace deal. Yeah, we'll have to see what ends up happening with this, but there are some key details regarding this deal. The first deal apparently did not include security assurances, but Ukraine knows that it would tie the United States to Eastern Europe and to the country when it comes to the mineral extraction. But they're saying, well, they can't control all of our minerals. It's going to affect us being accepted to the EU. So, I mean, this whole thing is just a total mess. I mean, and we knew this is what was going to happen. It was going to be a big issue in terms of getting this peace deal settled, because this doesn't even talk about Putin. Because obviously Putin has his demands, and when you talk about negotiations between these two countries based off of leverage, listen, if NATO is not going to actually join the war, which, like I've said earlier in the video, they're not going to, Russia's got the majority of the leverage, probably 80-20 in terms of they can demand 80%, or, they get like 80% of what they demand. Ukraine probably only gets 20% of what they demand. It's just the reality of these two countries without NATO troop involvement. Now, if there was NATO troop involvement, then Russia would be severely hampered, severely weakened, but then you risk the escalation that was Trump was put into office to not have this escalation. And so then you start talking about, you don't want to immediately go to nuclear bombs, but if you do have NATO against Russian troops, Russia's going to feel threatened to the point to where it's going to be very, very ugly, which is something you don't want. And that's kind of what Russia has in the back of their mind and how they use the nuclear bombs to their advantage by proxy. So obviously, there's going to be none of that. If Europe goes rogue and those European countries do get to the point to where they do send troops to contact the Russians, Trump is not going to be about that. He's not going to support it. We know that. So that's kind of why, why would you do that now when you had the support of Biden? It doesn't make sense to wait for Trump to come in and then do it. So I think that there is going to be a deal worked out here. There's sticking points with this minerals deal. I think this is probably the third or fourth draft they've had of this minerals deal, honestly. And the one that they were going to sign, this might be a new one where Trump demands more in terms of the total, maybe the total resources that they have control over of Ukraine. But Ukraine's saying they don't want to do this. Now Zelensky's saying, no, this is the exact same thing he said like 3 months ago. No, it's a grant, and we don't have to repay it. But I mean, if you're doing a minerals deal, that is the repayment right there. I mean, we're taking your minerals. But it does also tie the United States to the region. So we'll have to see what happens. I mean, they do want to be accepted, obviously, to the European Union. That's the next best thing for them outside of NATO, and they're not joining NATO. It is what it is. It's just not going to happen, especially when it comes to a peace negotiation. They certainly, I mean, NATO has said, the main people from NATO, their security advisors have said it's not going to happen. They're not joining anytime soon. And there'll probably be some type of guarantee, whether it's 10, 20, 30 years in a peace deal with Russia. I think a big sticking point for Ukraine is having a military. Russia is going to want them to demilitarize. Ukraine is not going to want it. Those were the big sticking points when it came to the 2022 talks in Istanbul, when they were trying to come to a peace deal back right after the war broke out. So, and then you also do have the amount of territory that Russia gets, the amount that Ukraine has to give up. Is there going to be a DMZ? Where is it going to be situated? Who's going to patrol it? So logistically, there's a lot of stuff to figure out when it comes to this. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.